Nobody was laughing by the time 16-year-old Danny Pruitt was finished, but they were laughing when he arrived. That's the thing about a boy showing up alone to a farm equipment auction in Colby County, Kansas in the summer of 1977, carrying a coffee tin with $340 in saved money and a handwritten list of parts he needed for a tractor that every mechanic in the county had told him was unfixable. The men in that auction yard had been buying and selling farm equipment since before Danny was born. They had seen hopeful buyers make poor decisions on summer mornings for decades. They knew what they were looking at when they looked at him. They thought they knew. What happened over the next 3 hours, from the moment the auctioneer called the first lot to the moment the yard went quiet, became the kind of story that gets told at diners and feed stores for a generation. Not because of what Danny bought or what he paid, because of what he knew. He was 16 years old. He knew something that none of the adults in that yard had thought to find out. And when the moment came, he used it. If you've ever been underestimated or watched someone else be, you already know why this story matters. Iron Ground is where those stories get told. Subscribe and stay with us. The Colby County Farm Equipment Auction ran twice a year, spring and late summer, at the Seibert Sale Barn off Highway 24. And it was the kind of event that attracted serious buyers, farmers liquidating equipment after retirement, to estates being settled, dealers looking for units to recondition. The summer 1977 auction had drawn 63 registered bidders and an unofficial crowd of onlookers who came for the same reason they came to county fairs, because something interesting might happen. Danny Pruitt arrived at 7:30 in the morning, an hour before registration opened. He had ridden his bicycle 14 miles from his family's farm outside of Oakley because his mother needed the truck for a dentist appointment and he hadn't wanted to miss the preview. He locked the bicycle to a fence post, smoothed his shirt, walked into the preview area, and began inspecting equipment. This is where the laughter started. It was not cruel laughter, to be accurate about it. It was the laughter of men who found the situation improbable. A boy, lanky, sunburned, wearing work boots that were slightly too large, moving through rows of farm equipment with a notebook and a flashlight, peering under hoods, checking serial numbers, crouching to look at undercarriages. Doing what the serious buyers did, at the age when serious buyers were still in school. Ray Denton, who ran a used equipment dealership in Colby and had been coming to this auction for 14 years, watched Danny for a few minutes from across the yard. Denton, somebody's boy playing farmer. A few men within earshot agreed. It was good-natured. Danny heard it and kept working. The equipment Danny was most interested in was a 1953 Oliver 88 row crop tractor, lot 14 on the auction list. It sat at the end of the north row, looking the way machines look when they have been through a lot and nobody has been kind to them in recent years. The paint was gone in patches. One rear fender was missing entirely. The front axle was visibly bent, not severely, but enough that the tractor sat at a tilt that any experienced eye would catch immediately. The bent axle was why the Oliver was priced low. The auction catalog had estimated it at $200 to $400 depending on bidder interest. It was the kind of lot that attracted parts buyers and people with more optimism than mechanical knowledge. The serious buyers had looked at it and moved on. Ray Denton had looked at it for 30 seconds. Danny Pruitt spent 22 minutes on it. He had a flashlight, a notebook, a length of baling wire he'd brought for checking hydraulic fittings, and a compression gauge his grandfather had given him 2 years earlier when the old man had decided Danny was old enough to use it responsibly. He checked the engine compression, all 4 cylinders, systematically, recording the numbers in his notebook. He checked the oil. He checked the transmission through the inspection cover. He got under the tractor and looked at the front axle from below, then took 2 measurements with a folding ruler. The men watching thought this was funny, a boy with a compression gauge. Danny closed his notebook, stood up, and walked to the registration table to sign in. He gave his name, his address, his age, 16, which caused the registration clerk to look up and then look back down without comment, and deposited his coffee tin with $340 in cash as his bidder's security. Ray Denton watched the coffee tin get counted and shook his head. Denton, what's he planning to do with $340 at a farm auction? Exactly what he came to do, it turned out, just not in the way anyone expected. Let me tell you about Danny Pruitt, because the 16-year-old who arrived at that auction with a coffee tin and a compression gauge did not get his knowledge from thin air. He was born in 1961 in a farmhouse outside Oakley, Kansas, the youngest of 3 children and the only one who had, from about the age of 8, followed his grandfather into the equipment shed with the focused attention of a student who has found his subject. His grandfather, Roy Pruitt, had farmed 240 acres in Thomas County for 40 years and had maintained his own equipment for all of those 40 years. Because Roy believed that a farmer who couldn't fix his own machines was a farmer at the mercy of someone else's schedule. Roy taught Danny the way farm knowledge gets taught when it works. Not with lectures, but with proximity. Danny handed tools. Danny watched disassembly. Danny learned to listen to an engine the way a doctor listens to a chest, for what the sound told you about what was happening inside. By the time he was 12, Roy trusted him with compression checks. By 13, with carburetor rebuilds. By 14, with valve adjustments, which require the kind of patience and precision that most adults don't have, and that Danny possessed in a form that Roy described, privately, as a gift. Roy died in the spring of 1975 when Danny was 14. He left Danny his tool set, 40 years of carefully maintained hand tools and a wooden chest Roy had built himself, and the knowledge that had accumulated in those 40 years of keeping old machinery running. He did not leave a letter or instructions. He left the tools and trusted that Danny knew what they were for. After Roy's death, Danny had taken on the maintenance of his own family's equipment, 2 tractors, a combine, a planter, as well as, informally, the equipment of 2 neighboring farms whose owners had noticed Danny's work and started bringing him problems they couldn't solve themselves. He charged nothing. He was 15 years old and he was doing work that professional mechanics charged $35 an hour for. He had also, in the 18 months since Roy's death, developed a specific area of knowledge that would matter enormously on the morning of the Colby County auction. He had taught himself the Oliver 88, every model year, every variation, every known fault and its fix, from the technical bulletins his grandfather had kept in a binder, in the equipment shed since 1954. He knew the Oliver 88 the way you know something you have read about so thoroughly that the knowledge stops feeling like information and starts feeling like instinct. The Oliver 88 row crop deserves its own introduction because without understanding what Danny knew about it, the auction makes no sense. The 1953 Oliver 88 was a 4-cylinder gasoline tractor producing 43 horsepower, a solid mid-sized workhorse popular in the Kansas wheat country through the 1950s. It was known for a durable engine and a transmission that, if maintained correctly, lasted effectively forever. It was also known, among the people who serviced a lot of them, for one specific front axle issue that appeared in the 1952 and 1953 model years. A design tolerance in the front axle kingpin assembly that, under certain conditions, caused the front axle to develop a visible lateral cant, a tilt, that looked for all the world like the axle had been bent in an impact or a rollover. It had not been bent. The tilt was a tolerance shift in the kingpin bushing, a wear pattern that could be corrected with a bushing replacement costing approximately $12 in parts and 3 hours of work. The axle itself was structurally sound, but because the tilt looked like impact damage, and any buyer who hadn't specifically read the Oliver 88 service bulletin from 1956, which described the issue and its fix in precise detail, would assume the axle was damaged and price accordingly. The bulletin was in Roy Pruitt's binder. Danny had read it in the winter of 1976, along with every other bulletin in the binder, as a part of the self-directed education he had been conducting since his grandfather's death. He had measured the front axle tilt that morning with his folding ruler. The measurement matched the bulletin's description of the tolerance shift exactly. The axle was not bent. The kingpin bushing was worn. The Oliver 88 in Lot 14 was not a damaged tractor selling cheap. It was a perfectly functional tractor selling cheap because everyone looking at it had made the same incorrect assumption. And Danny Pruitt was the only person in that yard who knew why the assumption was wrong. Now let me pause here and ask you something. Ray Denton had been buying and selling farm equipment for 14 years. The other serious bidders had decades of collective experience. They were not foolish men. They looked at the Oliver 88 and drew a reasonable conclusion from what they saw. A tilted front axle, a cheap price, a tractor worth buying for parts or not at all. They were reasoning from general knowledge. Danny was reasoning from specific knowledge. And the distance between those two things, in that auction yard, on that summer morning, was the difference between a tractor worth $200 and a tractor worth considerably more. Have you ever known something so specifically, so completely, that it gave you an advantage that experience alone couldn't match? Not expertise in a broad sense, but precision. The kind of knowledge that comes from going all the way to the bottom of one subject instead of halfway through many. Roy Pruitt had taught his grandson to go all the way to the bottom. Danny had gone. And on a Tuesday morning in the summer of 1977, the bottom turned out to be worth more than anyone in that auction yard had imagined. Some stories only make sense once you've felt them. If this one is already speaking to you, stay with us. There's more ahead. The auction started at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning in late July. On the Siebert sail barn had shade on the west side and none on the east, and by 9:15 the east side was already uncomfortable. Most of the serious bidders had positioned themselves near the auctioneer's podium where a box fan was running. Danny stood near a lot 14. The lots ran in order. Equipment came up, was described by the auctioneer from his catalog notes, was bid on and sold or passed. The first 13 lots took 45 minutes. A grain auger went for $180, a planter for $640, a post hole digger for $55, a John Deere B that needed an engine rebuild, the auctioneer said it plainly, went for $420 to a man who knew what he was getting into. Then lot 14. The auctioneer walked to the Oliver 88, consulted his catalog sheet, and gave the crowd what he had. A 1953 Oliver 88, engine runs, front axle shows damage, sold as is, sold. On opening the bidding at 150, silence. Nobody moved. 100 then, still nothing. $75. A parts dealer near the back raised his card. The kind of raise that means I'll take it at this price because I can sell the engine and the transmission separately for more than this. 80. The auctioneer was trying. Danny raised his coffee tin. Not a card. He hadn't been given a card. He'd been given a bidder number on a piece of paper. He raised that. The auctioneer looked at him with the expression of a man who has seen many things at farm auctions and has learned to process them without visible surprise. Auctioneer, I have 80 from the young man. Do I hear 90? The parts dealer in the back raised his card. Auctioneer, 90, 100. Danny raised his paper. Auctioneer, 100 from the young man. Do I hear 110? Ray Denton had turned to watch. He wasn't bidding. He had passed on the Oliver at the preview, but he was curious now. A boy bidding on a bent axle tractor with a coffee tin of money was at least interesting. The parts dealer went to $110. Danny went to $120. The parts dealer, calculating the math of what he could extract from the machine against what he was paying for it, went to $130. Danny went to $140. The parts dealer looked at his catalog sheet and then at the tractor and then at Danny, who was standing beside the Oliver 88 with his bidder paper raised and his expression absolutely calm. The parts dealer lowered his card. He'd calculated his ceiling, and this was past it. The auctioneer looked around the yard. Auctioneer, 140. Do I hear 150? Nothing. Auctioneer, 140. We're going once. Nothing. Auctioneer, going twice. Nothing. The auctioneer's gavel came down. The Oliver 88 went to Danny Pruitt, 16 years old, for $140, which left him $200 from his coffee tin, enough to ride his bicycle home and fix what needed fixing. Ray Denton walked over. Denton, son, that front axle is bent. You know that. Danny, the axle's not bent. The kingpin bushing is worn. Looks the same from the outside. Different problem entirely. Denton looked at the front axle, then at Danny. Denton, how do you know that? Danny, Oliver put out a service bulletin in 1956. It describes this exact presentation in the 52 and 53 models. The tilt is a tolerance shift in the bushing, not impact damage. Axle itself is straight. I measured it this morning. Denton was quiet for a moment. He was a man who understood equipment, and what he was hearing was technically specific in the way that only accurate information is specific. He looked at the tractor again. Denton, you said you measured it. Danny, with a folding ruler. The lateral cant is 4 1/4 inches at the wheel flange. The bulletin says 4 to 4 1/2 indicates bushing wear, not structural damage. A few other men had drifted over. The auction was continuing behind them. Lot 15 going under the hammer. But this conversation had become its own event. Denton, how much to fix it? Danny, $12 in parts, maybe 3 hours of work if I take my time. The yard was quiet in a way that was different from the quiet of a lot that doesn't attract bids. It was the quiet of a group of experienced men recalibrating something. Ray Denton had passed on the Oliver 88 because of the axle. Every other serious buyer had passed on it for the same reason. They had all looked at the same tractor and drawn the same conclusion. The reasonable conclusion, the one that experience suggested. And a 16-year-old boy with a folding ruler in a service bulletin from 1956 had drawn a different one, and was correct. Denton looked at Danny for a long moment. Then he stuck out his hand. Denton, where'd you learn that? Danny, my grandfather, Roy Pruitt, out of Thomas County. He kept every bulletin Oliver ever sent. Denton, I knew Roy. Good man. Danny, yes, sir. Denton shook his hand. Then he turned and walked back toward the auction. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. And the handshake was the acknowledgement. From a man who had been buying equipment since before Danny was born, to a boy who knew something he hadn't known. The yard went back to its business, but something had shifted in the way the men in that yard looked at the boy standing next to the Oliver 88. Danny rode his bicycle home from the auction carrying a receipt for a 1953 Oliver 88, Lot 14, sold for $140. He arranged with a neighbor to borrow a flatbed trailer the following Saturday and retrieve the tractor. He had it in his grandfather's equipment shed, his shed now really, by noon. The kingpin bushing replacement took 2 hours and 40 minutes. He had budgeted 3 and came in under. The bushings cost $11.40 at the implement supply in Colby, which left him $188.60 from his original $340. He drove the Oliver out of the shed on a Sunday afternoon in August. The front axle tracked straight. The engine ran with the steady, unhurried rhythm of something that has been properly maintained and is prepared to work indefinitely. He drove it up the county road and back, listening. He sold it in September to a farmer 2 miles north who needed a second tractor for his son's use and couldn't afford a newer model. Danny asked $480, which was fair for a running Oliver 88 in its condition, and got it without negotiation. His $140 investment had returned $480 in 6 weeks. After parts and his own labor, his net was $328.60. He was 16 years old. The story of the auction, the boy, the coffee tin, the service bulletin, to the handshake, spread through the Colby County farming community at the speed that useful information travels in rural communities, which is faster than most people expect and more accurate than most people assume. By the time Danny started his senior year of high school that fall, farmers who hadn't spoken to him before were stopping at the equipment shed with problems they couldn't solve. Ray Denton stopped by in October, not with a problem, with a proposition. He had a 1948 Farmall M with a cracked block that he'd been unable to move. He'd heard Danny had expertise with older equipment. Was he interested in taking a look? Danny looked. He had a solution within 48 hours. They came to an arrangement. Danny would repair the Farmall for a split of the resale value. It sold for $390. Danny's share was $155. By the time Danny graduated high school in 1978, he had repaired and sold 9 pieces of equipment through arrangements with Denton and 3 other dealers. He had saved $1,840. He had a reputation in Thomas and Colby counties as the person to call when the problem was old equipment that the dealerships couldn't or wouldn't fix. Denton, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've never seen anybody under 20 who knew equipment the way you do. Danny, my grandfather taught me. I just kept reading after he was gone. Denton, Roy taught a lot of boys over the years. None of them turned into you. Danny looked at the equipment spread across the shed. 3 tractors in various states of repair. A grain auger he was rebuilding for a client in Goodland. The Oliver 88's service manual still on the workbench where it had been since July. And he didn't answer. He just went back to work, which was, by then, the only answer he ever needed to give. Danny Pruitt opened his own equipment repair and brokerage operation in Thomas County in 1983 when he was 22 years old. He called it Pruitt Agricultural Services, which was a plain name for a business that was already anything but ordinary. Within 5 years, it was the most trusted independent equipment service in the county. Within 10, it was handling clients from 4 counties. He never advertised. He didn't need to. In rural Kansas, word of a man who could fix what the dealerships couldn't was better advertising than anything he could have purchased. Roy Pruitt's tool set is in the shop. The original wooden chest, maintained and supplemented over the decades, still the foundation of what Danny reaches for first. The service bulletins are in binders on a shelf above the main workbench, organized by manufacturer and model year, updated whenever Danny finds a new one at a swap meet or an estate sale. There are 43 binders now. Ray Denton retired from the equipment business in 1994. He drove out to Danny's shop on his last working day and shook Danny's hand again. The same hand he had shaken in the auction yard in 1977. Denton, I almost didn't shake your hand that day. I thought you'd gotten lucky. Danny, I got lucky that my grandfather kept his bulletins. Denton, no, you got lucky that you read them. The deepest knowledge is never the widest. It is the kind that goes all the way to the bottom of one true thing and stays there long enough to understand it.